Hey Hunters, HaloZoo here with another D&D 5.5 video, though this is a bit of a different one. So this is on something I have called the Champion Scale. Now, it's more of a broader thing. This isn't directly talking about anything in 5.5 currently. Uh, well, yes and no, but basically this is just a fun thing I did. I got kind of bored and just ended up making it instead of working on psionics and stuff like that. And I am working on psionics, and I'll have a video on that next week, maybe, assuming there's not another surprise UA, which we could get, but I don't know. Uh, but anyway, this is my rankings for how likely a class is to be brought over into 5.5 and win based on the storm scale and various other scales. Mark Rosewater from the Magic the Gathering side of Wizards of the Coast is done. However, I've consolidated the numbers. So instead of 1 to 10, I go 1 to 5. So 1 is already on the base roster. These subclasses are going to be among the initial lineup of subclasses as they were decided to be a good addition to it. And I will say now, the Ravnica and Tarkir subclasses that I'm doing in other 5e projects for Homebrew, those will also be part of it. So they're ranked as a 1 because I'm going to make a 5.5 version of those. So anything that shows up in the Ravnica or Tarkir stuff, assume it is a 1 on the champion scale. 2 on the short list to add. While they aren't on the base roster, they're good and easy enough to add to 5.5 and are thus in some stage of planning. 3, not a priority, but not problematic. They're not high on my list to bring over, but aren't exactly difficult to bring into 5.5 either. So this is kind of like, there's nothing wrong with them. They just aren't in the short-term plan. 4, challenging but not impossible. These subclasses have issues with their transition to 5.5 that make them harder to implement than others, but you could bring them over. These aren't... They're problematic. There's going to be some hurdles to overcome with the execution, but it's not the worst. 5, being removed as subclasses. They're on the blacklist because so you shouldn't bring them over as their features are moved to other parts of the class. But for the most part are being replaced in the lineup. So there's ultimately probably going to be more subclasses in 5.5 than 5e currently. But these subclasses are straight up gone. So and on to the actual subclasses themselves. I didn't list all of them one by one, as all PHB subclasses except Champion, 1. As they're part of the initial roster for base 5e, I intend to preserve their place in the lineup. Now that there's 4 or 8 initial subclasses per class, that's supposed to say note, but note that there is a rename there with Eldritch Knight becoming the Spell Sword, and the whole change to how fighter subclasses are named to Order of the Blank. So they're renamed, but they're all there, with the exception of Champion, which is the quintessential 5. It's a subclass I despise a bunch. If you've seen my 1D&D stuff, you might actually be familiar with my disdain for it. Unsurprisingly, it's being removed. Most of the features, aka anything that isn't improved critical, is being given to the base fighter to make it overall more interesting with the rework. And Cavalier is going to be slotted in as the simplest fighter. Also, I've listed the source. The Death Domain Cleric from the DMG, it's listed as a 1. The 8th initial domain is remaining alongside the others as a true part of the initial roster. Then The Oathbreaker, which is being renamed to Oath of Shadows, is also a 1, taking its rightful place as an initial subclass. It's getting a rename to allow for a broader array of character designs, not limited to being purely evil. So it's basically, you're not bound to being evil anymore. It's not quite Oathbreaker, but it's pretty much the same thing. It's not quite like some of the others where it's like there's a major redesign to where it is a different subclass. Path of the Battle Rager from Skag, Sword Coast, basically. 4, easily one of the worst options added to 5e. Needs a lot of work to the point that it would basically be a new one. So it's technically you could bring it over in something roughly equivalent to what it is, but it's a hard one. Arcana Domain, surprisingly solid foundation for a Sword Coast subclass. One of the few that I would say is a solid foundation. It is worth bringing back, even if Knowledge Domain would have some similar features, because Knowledge is getting some ways of getting spells, like they get cantrips from other classes now. So there is some overlap, but I think both can go their own directions with it, where Knowledge has the more broad knowledge stuff, but Arcana is more all in on the mystical, wizardly aspects of manipulating magic. Banner Fighter, also from Sword Coast. It's a 4. And I will say, some of these, it's not so much how interesting they are, but also the fact that other stuff has happened. As there's some that would have scale ranked higher if it wasn't for the fact that some options are they have some interesting places that they end up. So with Banner A, it would have been more intriguing to revisit, but the addition of the new Warlord class makes adding an alternative to Battlemaster's support build on Fighter unappealing. So you could bring it over and bring over roughly what it is right now, actually, with some tweaking to rescale it with how Fighter is rebalanced. But the fact that Warlord exists as a full class, it's like Banner 8 doesn't quite have the same potential and interest as it does in base 5e, so it's kind of hurt by that fact. Way of Long Death Monk, it's a 4, with Tasha's Way of Mercy being a thing alongside the coming update to Way of Shadows. Not a ton of reason to bring it back, though there's certainly more potential here than some other options. Like, I'd say it's certainly a higher 4 than some. Like, it's above Banner A and Path of the Battle Rager, but it could be below some other 4s, but I don't know. But Oath of the Crown Paladin, it's rated as a 3. Another actually decent Sword Coast subclass. This one has the potential as an option to bring over in the future. Not on the short list, but it could eventually be brought over. And then last but not quite least for Sword Coast, and specifically Sword Coast exclusively, is the Undying at a 4. It's pretty garbo. Like, it's probably one of the last ones that I would add, and it would be added mostly just to bring it over, because I've done everything else at that point. And with the 3 other death-related patrons possibly being enough, this is, and it's like, and I would even say, like, the only reason it's not a 5 is because there's nothing stopping me from doing it besides the fact it's not great and so underwhelming. So it's currently rated as a 4, but it's the lowest a 4 could be. Basically everything from Plane Shift series, Pyromancer Sorcerer, Ambition Domain Cleric, Solidarity Domain Cleric, Strength Domain Cleric, and Zeal Domain Cleric, all ranked as a 3. Yes, these are a thing, and they're all decent enough to include, even if other options might have similar elements. The Pyromancer may become merged with Phoenix Magic from an old Unearthed Arcana. So rather than a Pyromancer, it's going to be the Phoenix Magic, which is just all the fire stuff. Way of the Sun Soul. This is the first from Xanathar's we're going to go into, and it's a 2. Really needs the updates. Only getting dropped from the base roster because another needed it way more. And fit the lineup much better. Mastermind Rogue, currently ranked as a 1 with a question mark. Worst of the worst in the balance when it comes to subclasses. Preemptively placed as the 4th option in the base roster, though Inquisitive could get it instead. Swashbuckler Rogue from Xanathar's as well, and Sword Coast. All 4 of these are in both. It's a 2. A decent notable subclass. It's firmly positioned as a Wave 2 subclass on Rogue, as it was Wave 2 in base 5e. And it's a solid one that doesn't need work, so it's like, it's firmly in Wave 2, whereas like, it's going to be added then, but it doesn't need it as bad as some. Storm Magic. It's rated as a 1. And I fully admit there might be some bias here, but the messy subclass is getting reworked already. That lets it swap into being a ranged skirmisher, while Dragon Magic gets to be up close as part of the base roster. So they're both in the base roster currently, and this is more of a ranged skirmisher. Dragon Magic gets to be a close range caster. Then we go into the Xanathar, the new in Xanathar stuff. We have Path of the Ancestral Guardian Barbarian, which is ranked as a 2. Didn't quite make the base roster due to being spirit themed, similar to Totem Warrior and Wildheart. But the subclass is intended as the first to be added later on Barbarian. Path of the Storm Herald Barbarian is also 1. Added to the base roster since I like it, and I think it helps round out the base roster better while not worrying about what needs work more. And then Path of the Zealot is also a 1, because it needs updating, and it also adds some variety to the base roster with what it does, so it's worth having. College of Glamour Bard is a 1. Pretty much all the Bard subclasses here need updates, and this is one I decided was the best choice for the base roster. In general, I decided this was the best option. College of Swords, it's a 2, only misses the base roster because College of Valor exists, making this one somewhat redundant as an option, so as much work as it needs, it got downgraded to a 2 because I had 2 slots and 3 subclasses that wanted it. And College of Whispers, 1. I've always seen it as College of Glamour sibling, so I like the idea of keeping them together in the same roster. And it does need the updating as well, so it deserves it. Forge Domain Cleric, 2. Solid design to include. Option is naturally slated to get its long-needed tweaks, so you can actually build it the way it should be built as a hammer wielder. Though this might get... So, this part is actually a bit awkward because currently I'm not using the 1D&D cleric orders, like that stuff, which I might bring over, which would make this less needed, but I would still probably bring it over as a 2. It's just a note that the tweak is in a weird place right now with how the 1D&D versus 5.5 stuff is going. Grave Domain Cleric, also a 2. Only here because it's from Xanathar's, even if I find it pretty underwhelming overall. But, I mean, it's one of those I don't really care about it, but it's one that I'll probably bring over sooner rather than later. I might put it lower, but I feel like because it's from Xanathar's, it should be a 2. Circle of Dreams Druid is a 1. It's the worst Druid subclass of them all. And it also needs the update to interact with Wild Shape, which is being renamed to Wild Gifts. The most beside Circle land, thus making it the obvious inclusion. This is something I've actually advocated for in 1D&D as well, where it's like, Circle of Dreams needs the update. It's probably one of the two I would say needs a rework now the most. And that's no exception in 5.5. Thus, I decided it's the 4th subclass. Because I also brought over Circle of Seas, so as we'll see. Circle of Shepherd, it's a 2. Just barely getting passed over as part of the base roster due to another option being a necessary inclusion, alongside the fact that Wild Companion is a good option to use Wild Gifts on. So they don't really need it. And I already have some plans where they're going to be the masters of Wild Companion, just like Moon Druids are the masters of Wild Shape. Arcane Archer Fighter, it's a 1. I think everyone can agree the subclass needs a rework badly, thus making it a no-brainer to have as the 4th option, even if it has some overlap with the Spellblade order thematically. But I feel like, compared to bringing over other options, I feel like this one, it needs the rework the most, and would fit decently well into the roster. Cavalier Fighter, it's a 1. It was always a 1, as it's taking Champion slot as the simpler base subclass, since it's just a solid option. With weaker combat superiority being added on to expand it, as with a lot of other subclasses that aren't doing something else already. Samurai Fighter is a 2. Decent, but needs refining, especially since most fighter subclasses get combat superiority in 5.5 to add some more build variety, so they'll have it too now. There will probably be some other tweaking, but I decided that I didn't want to worry about it as much because Arcane Archer needed reworking, and Cavalier just fits perfectly into the base roster now that there's a slot open. Way of the Drunken Master Monk 2, relatively solid option for Monk. It's slated to return sooner as it's just a classic option, though it's certainly getting an improved arsenal regardless. Way of the Kensei, it's ranked as a 1. Literally the worst subclass on the worst class, which even steals the dumbest feature design from Mastermind somehow, as they have a feature that rewards you for hitting with unarmed attacks instead of attacking with your weapon. It's silly. The subclass is going to be made into something actually cool and is part of the base roster as it fits perfectly alongside Open Hand's greater emphasis on unarmed attacks and 4 elements special attack. So, Way of the Kensei is brought over as this is the monk who uses weapons, and it's actually going to be good at doing that now. If you haven't already seen it, it should be much better with weapons now. Of the Conquest Paladin, a 2. Another solid option planned to be added sooner rather than later. Yeah. Oath of Redemption is a 2 with a question mark. It's admittedly weird as I plan on adding it right now because it's an option that existed. It's one that was in Xanathar, so it's a 2, but I might just get rid of it, mostly because Paladin does not really work good for this build. Because you have a class that has a lot of abilities that reward you for whacking the heck out of, like, smiting stuff. I just don't think it really fits when you're trying to make a character who can use weapons and armor very effectively, and suddenly you're a pacifist. I don't know. It just feels very weird and difficult to pull off effectively, so this might get removed from Paladin to be moved on to probably Cleric being the obvious choice for this build. And just have it, Oath of Redemption doesn't exist anymore, because it's not as good. Gloomstalker Ranger is a 2. Outside some Murata to make things play a little better. Subclass is solid and doesn't need updating as bad. And it's more of a, compared to the other 2, this one doesn't need work as much. Horizon Walker, definitely needed work, so it's a 1. And it was my first choices since I hadn't started the rework yet. And it's now kind of like, it gives a callback to 1E in the new version that should ultimately play way better overall. Monster Slayer, it's a 1. With the Ranger rework coming, it's time to update the subclass, since Slayer's Prey doesn't really make sense to have when Favored Foe is a thing playing in a similar mechanical space. So rather than have 2 bonus action mark targets to do extra damage to them features, Monster Slayer is going to have a different thing in that slot. Maybe even something that upgrades and modifies your Hunter's Mark to be more powerful instead of giving you a separate thing that you do. Inquisitive Rogue is a 2 with a question mark. Currently planned as a later edition, though I may push it forward to let it play smoothly alongside Steady Aim from Tasha's. So basically think of it as this option is possibly getting pushed forward because of how Steady Aim interacts with Inquisitive and how it kind of makes the subclass feel not great. Scout Rogue, it's also a 2. While it could use some updates to make it more interesting to play, solid enough overall so it can be delayed compared to the others, where it's like the other 2 need updates more, so they take precedence over Scout and Swashbuckler. Divine Soul Soldier, 2. Solid enough option even after the Tasha's subclass is hit. Kept out of the base roster, since I think it'd be better to save the Clerical Sorcerer for a later edition. So it's not being added yet. Shadow Magic, 2. Previously a solid option. This one has seen better days. It could swap out with Earthen Magic, though I do really like having it in the base roster. So I'm tempted to keep Earthen Magic, but it's possible I swap Shadow Magic in. So it's a 2 with a question mark. Celestial Patron, 2. Originally slated to be one of the third wave patrons due to how Warlock subclasses work. It's now wave 2 as another patron moved up. The option is certainly getting its needed update. So it's going to get a new coat of paint. Hexblade Patron Warlock, 5. The biggest subclass design mistake is getting fixed in 5.5. Thus, Hexblade can't be Hexblade anymore, as proficiencies and charisma for weapon attacks are both being moved to their rightful place with Pact of the Blade. The new Shadowlord Patron will be its spiritual successor in the base roster as a new Shadowfell-themed option, so don't worry. Your Hexblades that currently exist, you can bring them over to 5.5. If anything, they'll be better, as Shadowlord will have a lot more abilities that play into doing stuff besides just fixing Pact of the Blade. So, and also, if you wanted to, you could swap your patron out and keep Pact of the Blade, or you could keep the Shadowlord patron, but switch from Pact of the Blade to a different Pact boon, as the options are specifically being divided from each other, where it's like, You don't need to combine these two to make them work. You don't need Hexblade to make Pact of the Blade work. So, Pact of the Blade works on its own now. You don't need it. You don't need a specific patron to be good. You can be good with any patron. War Magic Wizard 2, despite being rather lackluster compared to literally anything else for Wizard, it's actually planned to be added sooner rather than later, and I even created 3 other hybrid school wizard subclasses for Enchantment and Illusion, because of course, Conjuration and Necromancy, also kind of course, and Divination and Transmutation. Admittedly, the last one done. Everything else fell into place, and it's like, yeah, I guess these two get to be combined because no one else. It didn't really make sense to combine any others with them as much, so. And the other added subclasses have the same amount of issues with the transition, so. They have some amount of issues, so that also helps, where it's like, there's not really anything else to update that's high on the list, so. Order Main Cleric and Circle of Spores Druid from Ravnica. While not in the base roster, they're part of the Planeswalkers Guide to Ravnica project, and both will be part of the 5.5 update for them. Base 5e Artificer subclasses from Eberron and Tasha's. It's ranked as a 5. And this is one of those things of, Artificer is not the same class. So, these aren't really surviving. So, while you can technically make a version of the Arcane Halfcaster Artificer in 5.5, I have zero intention to do so, as I'm making what is really a completely new Artificer class, while making a completely different class called Mistblade to be the Arcane Halfcaster. So base 5e Artificer has little reason to be brought over when it's such a messy design. So it's like, yeah, I'm not trying to mess with it. It's being left behind in favor of better classes, and as a result, its subclasses are pretty much gone. Though you will notice elements of those subclasses show back up, like there will be some elements of Artillerist in Weaponsmith as well as Tinkerer. Some elements of Battlesmith will be in Tinkerer. There is an Alchemist, and then Armor will have stuff. So there's going to be spiritual successors to them. It's just, I cannot in good conscience say it's anything more than a 5, because they're not the same. Because the class is not the same. Critical Role classes and subclasses, Will Mount, etc. 4, given I don't care about Critical Role personally, I don't personally intend to make 5.5 versions of the content, though there's technically no major issues that would make them more difficult to transition. It's just a 4 for the sake of, I'm not considering these, but they're more like a high-ranked 5 than anything else. Or actually, it's a high-ranked 4, where it's really a 3.5 score, where it's kind of a weird one. Like, I've given it a 4 to represent the fact that I'm not bringing them over, but you can bring them over. Let me get over to Tasha's. Bladesinger Wizard. Since the new Sword Mage class exists and does similar things but better, hard to justify bringing the subclass back. Though there's potential to between getting light armor and the Bladesong feature, so it's not a 5. It's just, you can bring it back, but Sword Mage does what Bladesinger does, but cooler. So, because if you haven't seen it, its whole mechanic is you cast with a sword. That's what you do. That's your entire feature. College of Eloquence, it's a 3. I don't like the subclass and would love to scrap it, but I can't deny the fact that it's not hard to transition, even if it's ultimately a boring Bard, but it's just Bard, but more Bard. Yeah. And I admit I'm slightly biased as a result of that, but something very similar to Eloquence could be brought over, except not overpowered in skills, because my gosh, are they busted. Oath of Glory Paladin, 2, solid design overall. Could use some tweaks thanks to some redesigning that plays a little odd with one of their features, specifically the smites. Path of the Beast Barbarian, 2, solid option overall, so show up in the future before too long. Path of Wild Magic, 2. While there's an argument to be made that it needs updates badly, I think that's less of a concern here at 5.5, though I plan to give them scaling Wild Magic Surges. It could be upgraded to a 1 in place of Storm Herald, but I'm slightly biased against doing that and not worrying about it. But Cause of Creation Bard, it's a 2. Solid option. And I certainly don't mind updating it for 5.5's future content. Beast Domain, 2. Definitely getting some tweaks and potentially some nerfs too. May also get renamed to Passion Domain or get tweaked to be more of a pacifist build to better match the fact that you're supposed to be Peace Domain. Not just a normal cleric that says they support peace, but is secretly one of the most busted cleric casters in the game. Twilight Domain, 2 as well. Solid subclass overall to add in the first new content waves. Circle of Stars, 2. Relatively solid option that could use a little tweak or two. Make it fit better overall. Though the Spell Errata should help with some minor issues, like you can get Sacred Flame innately now. Circle of Wildfire, 2. Just like Stars, this subclass doesn't need too much work in order to be great, though this build will really love the improvements to produce flame and create bonfire. As better fire options is really good for them. Psy Warrior, this is one of those that gets kind of awkward. So, as cool as it is, the problem is that there's a different psionic system. So, there's actual psionic classes and a half psionics class called Thelarist. So, the subclass is probably not coming back anytime soon. It's solid in base 5e, it just doesn't fit well in 5.5's roster because of the different psionics mechanic. Though, it can be brought over. So, there is that. Rune Knight Fighter, it's a 2. It's an interesting concept. They could use some tweaks to make it better overall, so I think it'll be good to add sooner rather than later. Way of Mercy, 3. Certainly in an odd place, as I'm not entirely sure if I want to bring it over yet. With the potential to make it not part of the roster and have Shadow take over the necrotic aspects, while Sun Soul gets the healing aspects. Thus, it's a 3 to reflect its uncertain place, so I definitely think it's getting added before Long Death, since it'd be easier to make, more distinct from Shadows by comparison. Way of the Astral Self Monk, it's a 2. While it could use some tweaks, especially given what 4 elements is getting, I think that this has some unique potential as builds going forward. Oath of the Watchers Paladin, 2. Certainly a unique option among Paladin subclasses. This will definitely be added before long. Fey Wanderer Ranger, 3. Well, it's not bad and certainly unique. It is slightly marred by the reworked Horizon Walker, getting more of a developed mystical aspect, though there's some potential space for this one too. Swarmkeeper is a 3. Not exactly high on the list to transfer. I also think it might be interesting to give Beastmaster Primal Swarm companion option, though this subclass is certainly solid enough to include either way. Phantom Rogue, it's a 2. Cool concept, could use some better execution. Certainly fares better than the Xanathar's subclasses. Got some Ratchet and Clank stuff going on. Soul Knife Rogue, 4. Similar to the Psy Warrior, except it's actually worse. So, there's a new psionic system, so that already kind of screws up the fact that this had a different thing. And the Mistblade class exists, which is basically the Soul Knife shtick and a whole ton more, as their whole thing is they summon weapons of magical, like, fully made of magical energy. That's your gimmick. And as a result, Soul Knife is pretty low on the list. That said, there is still room for it. I won't deny that while Mistblade exists, it's possible to bring it over, but you can just take Arcane Trickster and get a roughly similar character, thanks to Phantom Blade existing. So, and you have some more versatility and actually good teleport to boot, so it might be better off going to Soul Knife, from Soul Knife to Arcane Trickster, just with a psychic theme anyway. Aberrant Mind Sorcerer 3, ranked lower as the new Sonic classes, takes some aspects of the themes this uses, though it's not going to be difficult to transition compared to some. So, it's better than some might get. Clockwork Soul, it's a 3. Not exactly problematic, I just don't like it. Though I think I do have some ideas for improvements to make it actually function as a decent non-healing support build, especially starting out, because my gosh, do you start out harsh. It's bad. Back to the Talisman Warlock. 5? Question mark? The Pact Boon nobody asked for is unsurprisingly not planned to return at all, with another option being considered as a 5th choice that will be mentioned soon, because it's relevant later. New Pact of the Bow being an offshoot of Blade is the 4th, though in spite of everything, there's some slight chance that it make a new version of the Pact Boon, though I have no clues to what it might look like to be anything better than what it was. Fathomless Patron 3. Much as I enjoy playing the build, I'm playing one right now even, it doesn't fit in well with the base 10 Warlock Patrons. 2 for each ability score besides Charisma, by the way. So I have to push it up a little bit. Genie Patron is another 5. Poor Warlocks. But here it's more of a... It's nothing against the subclass. It was just doomed from the start because I have a broader Elemental Primordial Patron planned. So that expands the elemental aspect beyond genies, and I intend to keep it that way. Also, for players who love the personal space, I decided it would be a fun feature to have to make a Pact Boon. So the new Pact of the Reliquary, which is coming later, is going to be, you get the extra dimensional space from Genie, but you can use it on any Warlock. So the fun of that is going to be available to all Warlocks now. There's also going to be some other stuff, which I currently intend to be kind of a... You're able to bank charges of your soul abilities and use them later. But it's to be determined, but that's currently the idea I want to go for. Order of Scribes Wizard, ranked as a 3. Well, normally wouldn't be great to have a subclass's feature get moved to baseline to the class, as the damage type swapping is a baseline thing, though not quite as absurd as Scribes can do it. The improved spellbook stuff isn't getting yoinked, it's just the variable damage type ones. And there's still room for them to actually keep that factor in, where it's like they're better with it in 5.5. So it's not on the short list, and has a minor issue of transitioning. I do plan to bring it over, and I would say this is a 3 mostly because it's a 2, but it would be a 2. It's just it has a minor issue in transitioning it, so it's held back from being a straight up 2. College of Spirits Bard 2. Definitely a cool and interesting subclass in spite of Bard's shortcomings, in my opinion. lending to its consideration on the shortlist. Undead Patron, 3. Just like Fathomless, this subclass is great. It just doesn't fit well in the base roster, especially between both Shadowlord and the new Vestige Patron slated for the base 10, with Vestige basically being the Vestige Warlock of Fori brought over, where you have like various ancient figures that you pull power from. And you basically like call on like dead beings for power. But this will definitely be added long before Undying is considered, so it's safe. Way of the Ascendant Dragon Monk, it's actually a 1, because it's going to show up in Tarkir, so as part of Tarkir content, it will be featured in the 5.5 Con/Dragon Guide to Tarkir project, so yeah. Drake Warden Ranger is a 2, meanwhile, from Fizzbands. Charming Bill with some rough edges to smooth out. Definitely one that's going to be on the short list. Lunar Magic at a 4. Not only is this subclass rather powerful, but it's also a little too close to the new Cosmic Magic I plan to add, or rather bring back, later on, that cares about the moon as well as the sun and stars. There is potential for the two to coexist, though, with Lunar being reworked to actually cycle through phases, while Cosmic can swap modes more freely. Lunar phase, like Lunar would be, you go from crescent moon to full moon to, like, you wax and wane basically between full and new moon, and then you've got like crescent moon and all that in the middle. Path of Giant Barbarian from Big Bees, it's a 3. As the newest actual option, subclass looks to be a nice inclusion to the roster, though it may be a bit till it's added to 5.5 currently. College Dance Bard from 1D&D, as we're now in the 4 1D&D subclasses. College Dance is a 3. Certainly a fun idea in theory. Suffers from a bad first pass, where it's a bit too monk-like in my opinion, but I love the idea of the Dancing Bard, so I'll probably do something with it eventually. Circle of the Sea. It's a 1. For such a new subclass, it certainly justified its place instantly as an offshoot of Circle the Land that gives the option for a true ocean-based druid. And while the first version isn't great, I intend to add my own adaptation of it to 5.5's base roster, so yeah. Path of the World Tree Barbarian. It's a 4. It does have some potential in spite of its rough first pass. Less certain of having it in 5.5, as the class it's based on, Warden, is returning, so the Life Spirit Warden inspirations on this subclass make it a bit more complicated to bring over. There's some chance it could work, it's kind of an awkward one where, once again, they've added an option that is made awkward by the addition of others, and those other plans kind of take precedence, as I think it's a lot more fun. Like having a whole class of the Warden return, with its mechanics of like shape-shifting and such. I think it's very interesting. So Path of the World Tree, unfortunately, gets knocked down a peg. Brawler Fighter 3 definitely is a fun concept, though bringing this over would pretty much require a rework, as it's tied to the Weapon Mastery system, which 5.5 doesn't have right now. It's a really fun idea to have an improvised Weapon Master build available, so it's worth it, even if it takes a bit to get around to. So, and I think maybe the idea would be they get an improved combat superiority, but it only works with improvised weapons. So they're really good at using them with improvised weapons, but they aren't as good with other stuff, which I think could be a lot of fun, where you do technically have good combat superiority, but you're using improvised weapons. But anyway, that has been my champion scale for D&D 5.5 subclasses to be brought over. I hope you all enjoyed this, and look forward to more content in the future, so we'll see. Maybe there's a video about psionics next week, I don't know. We'll see. But without further ado, I'll see y'all next time. Halo Zoo out.